The legal tampering period is underway in the NFL offseason, and the Bills have made a couple moves. We're going to break those down this week on the Wandering Buffalo podcast. Get your hands on stylish t-shirts, hoodies, and more at wearbuff.com. That's WEARBUF.com. And make sure to use the promo code TWB at checkout for 20% off your first order. Stay Buffalo proud with Wear Buff.
You're now listening to the Wandering Buffalo podcast with your host, Justin Goddard.
Bills Mafia, welcome into another episode of the Wandering Buffalo podcast, a show on the Buffalo FamBase podcast network. My name is Justin, and I am your host today. And recording this on Tuesday evening, as you know, the legal tampering period of the NFL has opened up. New league year starting shortly. So we do have a couple of theoretical moves from the Bills to talk about today. I do just kind of want to slap that little asterisk on it because these are all across the whole NFL. Any of these free agency moves are all players agreeing to terms in principle. Not very often that, something that's agreed on and reported goes backwards, but pause. I'll say not often that it happens to the Bills. There seems to be like one of these most years. I think back to a few years ago, the Bills signing J.D. McKissick. I believe he was coming off of the Commanders at the time, and he ended up backtracking on that agreement and went back to, I'm going to call it the Commanders. I think that's who it was. So these things do happen. Rare as they may be. But the first action that we got was the Bills signing Joshua Palmer, formerly of the Los Angeles Chargers. And this is a move that I really like. And I've seen a lot of negativity around it, a lot of questioning, a lot of pulling up his stat box and, looking at his lack of production over his first few years in the NFL. And for me, I like to kind of look forward with these players and try to project them into what I think they can be in our system and not versus, what they've done. And I know that's really hard to do. And there's the cliches of, free agency, you're paying more because you're playing for what the player's done and not what they will do, all that stuff. But for me, the context matters on all of these things of, being on the Chargers and being behind people like Keenan Allen and Mike Williams on the depth chart. The Chargers, drafting Ladd McConkey and Quentin Johnston, and, it's really easy to go on the other side of that and be like, well, if this dude's so good, then why are they drafting those players? And a very fair question, right? Right. But for me, the way I look at a move like this is the complementary skill set to what we have in our wide receiver room. And the one thing that felt like we were really missing last year for a team that gets a ton of man looks from opposing defenses, we didn't really have a man beater, a route runner, a separator. We have a lot of guys with different skill sets, but that guy that can just run a beautiful route and go get you a bucket isn't really a skill set that we had. And something that I thought that maybe we were going to get more of from Amari Cooper, kind of his calling card was being a route runner. And I think with Cooper, we just kind of ended up seeing his age, and it is what it is. And, it became time to move on. I like that in adding Palmer, you still added a guy that's pretty young. I believe he comes in at 25 right now. So definitely some ceiling that you could still unlock. And again, when talking about factors about a previous team, you have to consider, Harbaugh coming in as the coach, Greg Roman coming in as the offensive coordinator, you know, uh, a bigger commitment to the run game. And not only all those things, like Justin Herbert is a really good quarterback. I'm not here to slander Justin Herbert, but there's something like consistently off with the Chargers that pretty much every year for like the last 5 years, I'm looking at their roster like this team's about to do things, and they just kind of fail to live up to the expectations. So being able to look at this player's traits and match them up with skill sets on our team, I'm also keeping in mind that I think we were having very similar conversations last offseason about needing to go up and get one of these marquee receivers and, kind of feeling like Coleman wasn't the answer and, still needing a guy and all this and that. And I wouldn't disagree that we could still use more of an upgrade in the receiver room. But I think, starting with last year, this organization has shown that they kind of want to move away to that marquee number one guy that's going to make, I mean, the way the contracts are going, Jamar Chase tracking towards 35, 40 million a year. I mean, we're talking damn near quarterback money for these guys. And one of the things I can say about the Bills is it seems like they try to kind of stay ahead of trends in the NFL. And I think we could start seeing a shift to this type of philosophy, the everybody eats philosophy. Certainly saw a recommitment from the Bills in this type of signing and not going after Devontae Adams, for example. But also as, you want to get those marquee receivers, would you rather pay one guy $40 million or have like two 1B kind of guys that are making 15, 20 each? Not saying, necessarily that's how the league is going to go, but certainly a path that I could see coming. So a lot of people, a lot smarter than me in the football community, really like the signing for the Bills. I tend to agree with this one. The next one was an interesting one for me, and from other football minds out there, I'm told that his name is pronounced Mike Hoyt. I'm having a tough time with that every time I see the spelling of it. You know, longtime Sabres fan. All I see is Jochen Hecht. Uh, but depending on where you get your information on this guy, I think it's super interesting. He can be listed as an edge, as an outside linebacker, as a defensive tackle, and when you watch him play, he really does kind of show that versatility and just a really interesting player. And I guess I don't have a huge opinion on this one until I see how it comes together. I think it could be awesome. I think it could be confusing. I think it could be a bad decision. So I'm gonna have to reserve judgment until I see more of the plan. Eh, My first thought when seeing some of his film was thinking back to like the late stages Lorenzo Alexander, and he's kind of like one of those awesome Buffalo legends from terrible team history. Um, but towards the tail end, he did a ton of playing linebacker and blitzing from that position and getting down in a stance and playing some D tackle, kicking out to edge, and that's kind of the role that I could see here. And with that in mind, does that preclude us from adding another, edge guy? I still have my hopes firmly set on, Trey Hendrickson at this point. Obviously, by this point in free agency, we saw that it really was, in fact, about money and not championships for Myles Garrett. He returns to the Browns. Raiders locking up Max Crosby shortly before that. Some of these, mid-tier names disappearing from free agency. And by all accounts, it appears that Hendrickson is at least still somewhat available. Who knows what happens there? I would say that I'm very interested to see how this player works out and what it looks like in our defense. I would also say that I would be disappointed if that was like the final move at, pass rush, D tackle, wherever you want to kind of list him in here. Which kind of brings me to my next caveat, something I meant to say at the top of the show. The roster is very, very far from being set. We still have the remainder of free agency. We still have the draft. We still have that next wave of free agency after the draft as, teams see how everything's coming together and they find that they can move on from players. There's still a ton of time to work with here. So simultaneously would be disappointed if this was, the final move. I would also be wildly surprised if that was the final move. And then shortly before recording today, interesting move here. The Bills coming to terms with Darrington Evans, which I'm interested to see the degree of kind of hope of a plan here. I don't really know how to word that in a smart sounding way. But I have my heart firmly set on Ty Johnson coming back as the RB3. And who knows? Darrington Evans was somebody that was in the building. He had an awesome preseason 2 years ago. Last year, he was, in the mix and ended up being on the practice squad and going to the injured reserve and released from the injured reserve. And who knows? Maybe things would have been totally different if he was healthy and we would have never had a ton of fun with Ty Johnson. It would have been Evans instead. Maybe the team is just that much higher on Evans. For me, I still I'm cool with Evans being in the building, and maybe it's a practice squad role that who the guy is. Like I said, we still have a lot of time of assembling the roster before any football is going to be played. So maybe this is just an early plan for a camp body and see how it plays out. Maybe Ty Johnson still is in the mix. To me, the longer a player sits out there at free agency on this time of the year, we see the spending frenzy early. The longer they sit out there, the lower that price is going for me. So I don't think this move precludes you from bringing back Ty Johnson. It's just kind of interesting timing for me and I guess prioritization. For me, I think we know exactly what we got in Ty Johnson last year. He was awesome in pass protection. He was an awesome third down running back. You heard Josh Allen glow about him, calling him the best third down running back in the league. It's just not something I would have messed with. He would have been one of the priority free agents for me to bring back, and I don't think the price tag's going to be all that high. I believe he's going into his 8th NFL season. So we'll stay tuned there and see what happens. Like I said, free agency is kind of crazy, and we'll see where everything shakes out. Back end of this podcast, I do want to get into kind of the last of the positional review series, and my goal was to have had this wrapped up before free agency started. Missed it by a couple of groups, but they're pretty quick groups, so gonna burn through them real quick and kind of just see where we're at, see if there's, areas where I think additions need to be made. And I'm gonna start out with the linebacker group. I think this one is pretty much chalk at this point. And Milano, Bernard, Dorian Williams, Joe Andreessen, Edefon Ulofoshio, and Balin Spector. And I think with this room, the biggest thing is hoping for health. We've seen Milano and Bernard both deal with injuries. We've been super excited to see them play together and haven't really gotten it. I think injuries and hoping that we don't see age start catching up with Milano, the biggest thing in this room. Dorian Williams got a lot of playing time last year, showed a lot of growth. Love him being part of this mix, giving you the option to run 3 linebacker sets. We don't do it a ton, but it's nice to know that it's in our pocket and it can work. Joe Andreessen, super fun story that, obviously we know it. He was, a walk-on guy, ends up getting a spot on the practice squad. Saw some reps later in the season. To me, he stays around. We see if he can continue to grow, at the very least be a special teams guy for you. And, it could be the next fun, local UB kid that gets a chance with the Bills and sticks around for a while. A la Cam Lewis, Jamarcus Ingram. We've had a few of them. Edefon Ulofoshio, didn't see a ton of him last year. He did play a good amount on special teams. I'd expect more of the same next year. Balin Spector, kind of my question mark of this room. He's still, a cheap, cost-controlled option. I still have, the memories of Tremaine Edmonds leaving and us not really knowing the plan at linebacker. And Balin Spector was the lead dog for that job for a while. Is the cost control worth it? I mean, we've seen him just dealing with constant injuries and not really being available. So, like, is it worth looking outside the organization to, upgrade that, 6th linebacker spot? And this is a room that I fully anticipate seeing additions throughout the course of the offseason. There's usually like 10 linebackers floating around, going into the preseason games. So I do expect additions here. I don't really expect any changes in the room. Going to the safety position, obviously Cole Bishop, Taylor Rapp, Cam Lewis, as kind of like your one of the backup safeties, dime player. Kareem Jackson was in the mix last year, free agent now. DeMar Hamlin, obviously a free agent as well. And this is one that I see a ton of Bills fans wanting big upgrades here, wanting swings. I don't know that I would necessarily disagree with that. From a more predictive standpoint, I don't see a huge swing here for the starters. I think you made a reasonable investment in Taylor Rapp with his contract. I think your investment was last year with Cole Bishop, and I think that's your plan for your 2 starters right there. I think we will see some depth additions, but I mean, I see a ton of like mock drafts having us go safety in like round 1 or round 2, and I just, with being in McDermott's track record and the development of safeties and the historical asset allocation that they've been willing to give to this position. I mean, this is going back all the way to Carolina. Like, there haven't been huge investments made. It's been later round picks. It's been free agents that they get the most out of. I would love to see what a dynamic athlete safety looks like in this group. Thinking back to like when Kyle Hamilton was coming out, like what a guy like that would look like in this defense. It'd be awesome. I just don't see it as being a very likely course. I think Bishop and Rep are their guys right now. We're going to see some depth filled out around them. I know a lot of Bills fans don't want it. I could see a path where DeMar Hamlin's back on a cheap deal. I mean, we're through 2 days of free agency, day and a half, whatever, and there hasn't been any movement there. We'll see what happens. I think this regime really does value guys that know the defense. They're comfortable in the system. They've been in the building. I think DeMar Hamlin's trying to go get some starter money right now, and that's not on the table from the Bills. And if the market kind of tells him that his offer is similar to what the Bills were offering, I'm not surprised if he's back. To me, it just should be in kind of a depth role and maybe competing and pushing Cole Bishop so he's not handed the job. Last group we have here is the cornerbacks, and we have Taron Johnson, Benford, obviously kind of looking for that new contract. He is extension eligible. Kyer Elam, Brandon Codrington, Jamarcus Ingram, Daquan Hardy, and, filling out the room to Corey Couch, who was on the practice squad last year. Obviously, the big loss to this room at this time is Rasul Douglas, and one of the more apparent areas of need for this team, and something I'm kind of disappointed they didn't go after early in free agency. A lot of these guys have already been, swiped up by other teams, and I think Benford and Taron Johnson are awesome. I don't know, man. Elam's been in the building, and obviously the AFC Championship game leaves a bad taste in our mouth for Kyer Elam. I could see this shaking out anywhere from him being traded, anywhere in the next couple weeks, all the way to him being given a reasonable chance to be the starter opposite Benford. And I don't really know what to make of that. This again goes back to like the Tremaine Edmonds as a fan panicking that there's not a plan there, and the plan was already on the roster, and it was Terrell Bernard, and he was awesome. And I think for as much as we as fans can be down on Elam, he also hasn't had like full-time starting reps. It's been like, oh, somebody's injured, go get in there. And the way you prepare, how you're ready for the game, what your role's supposed to be that day, it's just different when you're not going into the game as the starter. And I'm not here advocating for the Bills to be ready to go in September with the plan of Benford and Elam as your two starters. It's just kind of my cautionary tale right now of like, I think there's a world where that could be the case. We see changes to the defensive coaching staff that, indicate maybe there's going to be a little bit more man used. Kyer Elam's calling card was man. He's still very young. If he's not traded, he's going to be on the roster because it makes no sense financially to cut him. So my expectation is that throughout the course of this offseason, he's going to be given a chance to compete for that number 2 job. And what do the additions look like to the room? I'd imagine before the draft, there's some sort of veteran addition to compete, maybe a draft pick. This is another spot. Like, do we expect a high investment draft pick? I don't know. We've seen it twice under Bean. One being Trey White, which was a home run. One being Elam. In between there is Benford, 5th round pick. Dane Jackson, I think, was a 6th round pick. There was some undrafted guys in there. There was some stopgap veterans, thinking about Josh Norman and Kevin Johnson. they've addressed this position in a myriad of ways over the years. So I don't fully know what to expect here. I think with the outstanding needs at edge and defensive tackle, I'm still preferring to go there early in the draft. We'll see. This position group has the biggest range of outcomes as far as like trying to predict that's what's going to happen. And throw it out there, like Rasul Douglas hasn't gotten snatched up by anybody real quick. And, I definitely felt like he lost a step last year and he wasn't the same player as the tail end of 2023. But again, going with the theme of a player that knows your defense, knows how to do their job in the defense. If he sits around the market long enough and, is looking at a short-term, low-money deal, is that the competition that you bring in for, say, Elam and a rookie, Ingram in the mix, Daquan Hardy, who, we brought in last year as to be like a return specialist, but he ended up looking better at the cornerback position than he did doing returns for me last year. So whole host of outcomes that could happen at that position. But hey, we made it through the positional review series. We have a ton more content coming out over the course of this off season. So make sure you're tuning in every week. Like I said, free agency is crazy. We're getting into the evening hours as I'm finishing this recording. Probably by the time I hit end on this, there could be another move made by Brandon Beane. Who knows? But we're going to try to stay as up to date as possible. Might be some bonus episodes in here if we get some, significant names or big trade happens, anything like that. Best thing you can do is make sure you're subscribed so you're not missing anything coming out. It does help us out, and we appreciate it if you drop a like, share, tell a friend, drop a comment, do all the fun things for us. As I've been talking about, we've been kind of retooling the website, doubling down. We have another writer for us. We have some draft profiles coming out for, positions that we think the Bills could target in the draft. We got the merch on the website. Check it all out. Awesome things happening. A lot of stuff coming out through the course of this offseason. So make sure you're tuned in. Make sure you're subscribed. Thank you for joining me tonight. And as always, go Bills.